Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Daniel Winkler.
So thinking about what's not and what is a good place to start eating mushrooms, we made up these 14 fantastic fungi. I love alliterations, and I had to pick some number. And so I think these are the best and the safest mushrooms we have. So I'm going here for the top question. So what is rare mushroom Pacific mushrooms? No spot on this focus as much chanterelle biomass as we have here, I think, because we have such big ones and there's such abundance. All that abuse that has been done to our forests even benefited the chanterelles. They are very happy in plantation forests. Morels, talk in detail about sulfur shell or chicken of the woods, which is not a spring mushroom, so I'm focusing on spring mushrooms. They happen early in the season. So if you have rains in July and August, it's a good mushroom to look out for when you're hiking in the summer. Because the trunk of dead trees standing on the ground, they will hold the water very nice. So you get rootings when you don't really expect mushrooms. And that's especially when you're closer to the coast, here on the coast, Olympic Peninsula places, or in the mountains, while down here it might be very dry, but one good rain and they might have Kimberleys, Sporassus, the cauliflower mushroom, that really shows in the fall or even into the winter. All kinds of buffaloes are have that today. Oysters, yes, tons of them right now. Chagnanes, lobsters, not a spring mushroom, but also one of these things that start in July, August, September. So often when we go out and pick chanterelles, then in October, these lobsters have been out there for 2 months and nobody bothered to look for them. And they can get a little old and they can get you also sick, as you know. Then milky caps, also just a fall mushroom, just as much as the pig's ears, Ericium, also black trumpets, even much more of a winter mushroom, often late fall, winter on the coast with hen oak especially, but yes, also oaks. Then hedgehogs fall and into the winter. And so these mushrooms all have in common that they don't have lookalikes that are challenging. I mean, if you can't tell apart a mandarin from an eggplant, you should not be mushroom hunting. And but if you can tell the difference between a mandarin and an orange and a grapefruit, yes, you can work your way into mushrooms. And these are the easy ones to start out, but there's footnotes, morels, toxic raw. These mushrooms here, these two have gotten people sick. And so this is also something you always have to look up when you talk about edible mushrooms. How many people get a reaction? Sensitive people, if you have a sensitive system, you gotta be extra careful, and you always want to cook your mushrooms extra. We don't have any wood here, which is surprisingly rare here in the Pacific Northwest, all around the world. The winter will be fruiting. It's a tropical rainforest, or out east of the Rockies in Europe. I grew up in Munich. They fruit in the winter often on dead elders. No, not alders, elders, not the berries. They fruit on dead elders. And if there's a little bit of moisture, sometimes they're dried, sometimes they're fresh. Pretty strange. It's a winter mushroom there. It could be year round. And here in the Amazon, even if the indigenous people don't eat many mushrooms, and there's some tribes who know their mushrooms, and many tribes in the Amazon, surprisingly, who are not deep into mushrooms. But the wood ears is something they all know. My favorite is to marinate them and then do jerky with them, mushroom jerky. I would even go to a Chinese store and buy them or a regular store to make this jerky because it's really nice and great thing to do also with oysters. In spring, one of our most dazzling top fungi is our cyclic almonds. Can be really bluish on the but sometimes just a little bit. And the greatest is to blow one out. And then, you wait a couple seconds, you think, oh, it's not working in it. that cloud of spores they release, because when they feel wind, they shoot their spores so that the spores can spread out far and wide. I read some people were eating them. I didn't dare to, and it's not really worth it. But the orange meal fungus that has no blue tones is widely eaten, and it's known for not having a taste. So that's something. Now, our first mushroom of the year is the spring morel or green thimblecap Winkler. It grows with cottonwood, so when we smell the cottonwoods flowering, that's their season. And they grow around cottonwood. So often it's quite brambly with blackberries. If it's flooded areas, they're not happy. So if it's seasonally flooded, they don't like that. So it would be where there's no, around the areas where there's flooding, but not in the lower parts. And the taste is quite okay. I think that some of these camps are definitely as interesting as a landscape morel, which I think is the lamest of our morels. Some people like to stuff them, the stems. But it's years where I don't bother. It's where I just go for them. And also, if you live in town, I mean, there's cottonwoods everywhere, right? There's a little neighborhood park, wetlands, and then you can look for them and enjoy them. That's anyway my daughter maybe 50 years ago. Yeah. So with these morel-like fungi, I put it here to show you how to tell them easily apart. So here you have a true morcella, a true morel. In this case, this was Morcella nea, one of the morels we found this weekend under shrubs. They like also to grow with cottonwoods. And really, besides the general recognizable characteristic of the cap, the ridges and the pits, is it is one big cavity when you slice them open. And you only get that from the true Morcella. When you look at the purple bohemica, the spring morel, you slice it open, the cap is only attached to the top, and it has the steps. We don't have one big empty cavity. And when you look at the false morel or the brain mushroom, Gyromitra esculenta, it's much more convoluted. And all of these guys are toxic raw. And Gyromitra esculenta, there's even a speculation that it's not just dangerous raw, but some other stuff, and I'll get to that later. So this is when you want to hunt morels. You should have these three groups. You gotta be able to tell apart, and that's not rocket science. So Gyromitra will provide you the same toxins as rocket fuel. That's how they figured out toxins. Okay, so first we do a little bit of morel manual. I for quite a while didn't get why people so obsessed with morels, because landscape morels happen to grow in my yard in Kirtland next to me. I mean, yes, it's spring, it's beautiful, life comes back, and it's so nice to be back out in nature, and it's the calypso orchids, the balsam root in the mountains, many reasons for this. But the landscape morels in town, they were like, but the naturals, the fire morels, there's a lot of better ones. I didn't consider the fact that we actually have medicinal benefits in morels, which I here out of my fold out on medicinal mushrooms in North America. In traditional Chinese medicine, they were used for toning the stomach and intestines, reducing phlegm, helping against shortness of breath. Then in modern research terms, they have shown to be active against E. coli, anti-inflammatory, immune enhancement. Most mushrooms really enhance our immune system, because basically the immune system says, fungi, fungi, get out the cannons, let's watch out what's happening. So it just gets our system, I guess, and it helps it to get alerted. And then also it contains beta alanines, something used for power and strength, which I'm otherwise not familiar with, but I have it here. I did that field guide together with Robert Rogers, who wrote the what was called the fungal pharmacies. So it's really one of the leading researcher and practitioners with medicinal mushrooms. So some of these things, his knowledge, and yes, I absorbed it, but I have never took that stuff. So morels are also, wherever they grow around the beach is now a market because they have such a value. And here when we are morel hunting, we have to on a burn, we have also to deal with competition of commercial pickers, which from I think our mushroom clubs get a little bit too bad a reputation because it's also nice to see people who love mushrooms like we do and even actually help to support their livelihood. And nobody's getting rich who's out there picking mushrooms. That's just the wrong field to get rich, but it's often existences of people who don't fit very well into other situations, but they love nature, love to be uh, under control by themselves what they're doing, no hierarchies. And so I think it's pretty all right. And there's so many mushrooms, it's really not that we wouldn't get any because the commercial pickers have been so awful. Yeah, and in Tibet they get the same price per pound as people get here because it's one global market. And there it's a lot of money when you get $5 a pound, which then at the wholesaler is around $10 a pound, and then it might be $20 or $30 a pound, and so on. First morels in the year is crazy. I've seen in an Asian store in Seattle, Jamaica last year. I think it was $90 a pound for the first morels, and um, yeah, so quite crazy. And so you see that in on the markets, the Tibetans in some regions they didn't give a damn about morels. That wasn't part of what they were eating, but in some other regions where they were actually picking them and enjoying them. But then, once there's a value attached, people go out in the woods and collect. And interestingly, in a whole bunch of areas, they happen at the same time as caterpillar fungus, Ophiocordyceps sinensis. And everybody who could would be above tree line picking caterpillar fungus, where there's really big money. But morels with less money, but it was often the women who collected them because they were staying back to take care of the livestock, or the elderly couldn't go cordyceps collecting, so they would go on day trips. During the day, go morel hunting, which I heard plenty of stories how the fear of the bears, you would be competing not for the morels, but bears would attack collectors. I've seen some stars. So something here where luckily hear very little about encountering bears and being actually mortals. So morels, we do love them because you can do so many things with them. They have a great structure. You can slice them up in many ways. I like this little wheels. Nice way to do it. But often when I have smaller morels, I always like halves, quarters, and then the bigger ones are half to stuff. And what's the best to stuff a morel with? Morels. So it's putting that, but the morels up like cook and then onions and garlic, maybe add a little bit of a grain, cheese, herbs, and then I stuff them with it. I have recipes. I saw in one newsletter where they suggested you buy sausages and then you peel the meat out of the sausages and you push that into the morels. I tried that and that was just totally overpowering the morale. I mean, all the grease that came out from the sausage came out of the morale, and that was really, I did it once, and when I see these recipes, it's like, yes, sausages are great, and it's a novelty, but do something else with your morels and crabs. So it's a much better idea than, just turn them into a sausage skin. So now I'm going through a couple of the species. So our blonde morel, and you guys here are very lucky with the Columbia River having them. In Seattle, we find very few of them. Orchards sometimes, but and in orchards, if it's an old orchard, you gotta be very careful. If the orchard has been around for 50 years or 60 years, then they're usually loaded with lead arsenate sprayed from the late 60s, and people often spray it longer, and that is not going anywhere unless you keep picking the morels and eating them. Then it's going somewhere else. Otherwise, it circles right there. And we had a guy, Joe, I forgot his family name, Italian name, on the East Coast who actually died from morel heavy metal poisoning because he had the habit of having a nightcap morel each night. And they did thorough research. Where did the heavy metal come from? And he didn't work in a field where there was, he didn't need anything else. His morels had heavy metals, and he had that habit. So I guess none of us eats morels like that, but he was the king of apple orchards, New Jersey, New York, and picking that and doing that for years. And they tried to cure him, did chelation, trying to get the heavy metals out, which, by the way, you could use for doing that. In Ukraine, was a pharmaceutical developed after Chernobyl to take out the radiating heavy metals, cesium, and so on. And that was actually using straight fungal chitin, because that also absorbs it. So chitin can bring you heavy metals, but it can take them out too. And so the poor guy, even with chelation, in the end died early from eating heavy metal polluted morels. So otherwise, we don't have any other reports that anybody had heavy metal impact. We also have hardly any research on heavy metals in mushrooms in the US. We had Erica Klein at UW in Tacoma doing some research, but it was only published online. Do not pick mushrooms where they spray water treatment sludge in the forest, which we have a couple forests around in the Seattle area. It looks like there is earthworm poop suddenly on dead trunks and stumps. And it's maybe how they shoot it from the trucks. There's lots of roads there too. And that's all full of heavy metals, antibiotics, all these things that do not break down in water treatment facilities. And in Germany, they tried that also in the 70s, and they outlawed it right away, just like studded tires, because of the negative impact. And you have to burn all that nice, rich humus you get out of water treatment because of heavy metals, because of pharmaceuticals, and of course, you can have these filters that take out these pollutants. So, and we have now all things forever chemicals they spray out in agriculture with water treatment. It's so irresponsible. And you know, these farmers even get sick and cancer from all that stuff. And there's money to be made, and let's push it on the farmers. Okay, there's another one here. Rotella pupillifera, that is with cottonwoods associated. The half morels are very different than all the others. You see how the cap is free. It's still some cavity, but definitely not as all the others. And they are smaller, tendency smaller, much rarer, and they used to be semi-libera, that's half free Latin, but that's the European name. And what we have to point out, talking about blonde American morels, is that they have much more irregular pits and ridges. So with the black morels, which I'm going to show you in the next slides, there's much more order to the shape of the fertile cap. So here we still have a different branch. So we have three main branches in Morcella. One is the blonde morels, the black morels, and then there's Rufopronea, which is the most ancient. It's easy to cultivate, and it has the least of taste. And these guys are disturbed areas, wood chips, construction sites. All morels love disturbed areas. All the black morels for sure. And so it shows up here once in a while. You get a red staining out of it. When young, it has this contrast. When black and white, as age, it gets all white. And I never found it up here. I've down in California. And then here on the left from this weekend, this is Morcella tridentina, which was described in 1898. So you can bet it's not an American one, because we used European names here. This is northern Italy, and this is what Kuhl described, but it was already described in a real that it's Morcella frustrana, because it looks like a palm morel and it's not. So when we're out there hunting morels right now, there is these long-looking morels, but they're black morels. You can see how the ridges are pretty long, regular running down, and that's part of the black morels, but it lacks the color. We also a bunch of fire morels when really young, before exposed to light, can be very blonde. So the color is, it's always what part in the life cycle are you, what are the conditions. The most common for most of us down here is the landscape mural that was in my yard well, 20 years ago or so. And in March, a little snow came. So that was about 2 weeks when I followed them from little beginnings here, growing to good size. And you see the straight lines here again. And in Fortuna, I think people were upset about it growing in their yards. And that's where that importune came from. A strange name. And this land is Corral because we have this other California landscape Corral as well. So that's how we can make a differentiation. And I would think these two landscape plants have the least taste, but they're the easiest to cultivate, which people have managed. Cultivate morels. There's actually twins in, I'm a twin too, twins in Denmark in their 50s that have managed to grow so far 43 different species of morels. So they cracked the code. They know how to grow all these morels. They have not shared it, have not scaled it. They were just playing around with it. And at some point, we definitely gonna move beyond low quality landscape morels, which is of course still better than no morels at all. Like in the store now, you can buy these Chinese morels, which is grown by the ton. They've been doing that for 25 years. I actually, when I was doing environmental work in the areas in the early 2000s, somebody was suggesting to us growing morels, so nobody came. I had no idea, but there was in Szechuan that people worked on it and figured out by accident how to grow them. And part of it is they let a growing bag sit on a field, and to have the growing bag off the ground, and then have the center mycelium in the ground that showed them how to do it. So they would put the growing bags on top of the field that was, just soil. I don't know what they were mixing in it. And they scaled up, and now they have greenhouses full of morels, and they are here now on the market. So nobody in a greenhouse has called these things. This is our most common natural. So all morels are natural. Like this one, natural is the reference here that it doesn't take a fire to produce, because we have these burn or fire morels that only show up after fire, but the naturals just pop up in natural forests or naturally show up. And the most common is here was Snyder's morel, named for a mycologist who described this species, Morcella optype, it's Hudsonii, not Hudsonii, which there was a report and it was described in 1935 in King County, which Seattle is King County, goes from Puget Sound into the Cascades, and then it wasn't seen again. Or nobody could make the connection. Now with DNA, I came here and said we have 3 reports, but now I was told we have 4 reports because there's one in Northwest Oregon towards the coast as well. It likes to grow in conifers. And I called it, because we need a common name, I thought, let's call it the King morel because it was found in King County. So, and of course, King County is now to be named after Martin Luther King. They're changing everything around from a royal symbol to the facial depiction of Martin Luther King. So, and we spell this in this. So I maybe should say these pictures here, many of my pictures are all photo stacked. This is maybe 30 pictures. And then they have different depths of field, and with the software you get, with a regular camera, you get this in focus, all these things in focus like that is really difficult. So photo stacking makes that possible. And okay, so then the fire morels, we have 3 species which I cannot tell apart, and it's frustrating because there's some that look really different. There's a very thin wall fire morel that also smells quite spermatic, but I can't just attach a name to it. DNA tells us we have 4 species. One, the fuzzy foot or the gray morel is really easy to distinguish, but these 3 ones here, Ocella explorans, which I had to make up common names. Nobody bothered, so I called it the luxuriant morel, which is the translation Eximia exceptional, and then I couldn't do better. Then sixth morale for Morales Stellata, the sixth morale number six of the Illa. So there was a mycologist who could see he or she had, it was a he has a different DNA. This could get a name, and he couldn't even come up with an environmental name or whatever. It was just number six Elata. And I thought it was pretty cool. But anyway, so this is what you find of burns, and you see this open cavities and burns looking really nice and fleshy. So if you love morels, if you want lots of morels, you gotta go on burns. Now you had Grand Blizzard speak for you with the geoforager, really worth its money when you wanna go out there to I paid that money so far for Gaia, which yes has its advantages. Geoforager doesn't help me when, let's say, I'm out in the Himalayas, but Gaia can go maps there. Better talk maybe to Trent to work on some other areas. But so really helpful, and yeah, the whole fire crisis we have, the at least we have the morale benefit. It's such a pity, we had that one year where we really have optimized if there was enough. Second year, maybe there's a few, but then it still takes decades to grow back. I mean, it's just so heartbreaking driving to Sisters this weekend and seeing, the Detroit fire, which was maybe 4 years ago or so, and then next fire and the impact of fire after we suppressed fires for 120 years. They just come with such power now. So having climate change together with mismanaged forests by suppressing fire is just such a hit. And yeah, okay, we get morels one year, but then the Kimberleys are gone for many years. So okay, and there's the other fire morel, Montana tomentosa, which Steve Trudell told me would be another branch, so that we now have four branches of morels. That would have its own branch, which being quite different and different double-walled stems. So this is the most flashy of them, and I heard some people get more reactions to these guys, and really nice. And that's when they're young, and they're so dense. But this is my wife and my other daughter. Now it's the same daughter again, Sophia. And so with age, as it happens, the hair gets gray and you lose it. So even with the morels. And yeah, great morels, and they come later. So when everybody already was on birds, and there's still a little bit of enough moisture, these guys can still be there in July or even in August. So you gotta check along the creeks, shady spots, but there needs to be, if it's all bone dry, doesn't matter which morel, none of them can grow. But these guys come later, and it can go longer too. Yeah, and that's morel hunting and fires. When you hunt naturals, that gotta be a very, very, very exceptional year that you bring down that kind of harvest. And then, of course, when you get your morels, you want to dry them in the sun, or you still dry in the sun, because any mushroom you put in the sun will turn the UV light, the ergosterol, which is in every cell wall, in every fungal cell wall, into vitamin D. So you charge your mushrooms with vitamin D. And according to Paul Stamets, he tested some mushrooms he had charged 8 years ago. The vitamin D was still there 8 years later. Now, that's not something we can do in October, right? The sun just doesn't have that power. But with the morels, it's easily done. And if they're not fully dry, I just finish in the dryer. And also, the more you would cut them open, the more surface you show vitamin D you get. And down here, there's even research papers here. Irrigation with UV light turns ergosterol in D2 fresh or dried in ethanol. So if you dry doesn't get you any more vitamin D if they're once they're dry. But apparently, if you put them in ethanol, you can charge them. I don't understand why I put my morels in ethanol. I mean, they would maybe don't need a barbecue, like probably just eat them. We haven't done that yet. Gonna try. Okay, was that the next? No. So now we have the false morels, and we call them green mushrooms. But they look quite brainy, and they are very different. We have at least two species under that bank, Pacific Northwest, and they contain a really nasty twist. So they contain charomiton, and that gets hydrolyzed. By the way, you should never eat anything hydrolyzed anyway. But here they get hydrolyzed in monomethyl hydrazine, which is straightforward rocket fuel. So the good news with rocket fuel is it's highly inflammable and it's also very volatile. So if you cook them, or even if you dry them, already reduce the monomethyl hydrazine, very strong. So these guys were traded on the markets in Europe, dried, often mixed in with the morels. And I found a report of a German mycologist, and she tried as a young woman in the 1930s or 40s. They were always in a Christmas soup. They put in these gyromitras. And so then she heard something about toxicity, and but they ate it only once, and it was fine. So she ate them for 3 days in a row, and then she got sick. So also an important factor with certain mushrooms. One time the system can handle it, 2, 3, 4 times, not. And we have a couple mushrooms. If you eat them for a week, shouldn't say that without having mushroom here. But so accumulative toxicity can be an issue with a few mushrooms, but not what we usually enjoy, like chanterelles or king boletes or so on. But the morels are really iffy group. We had, unfortunately, morels, right? The morels we had should have said that 2 years ago, 3 years ago in Idaho, we had 3 people dying from this. And 2 people were dying. They were eating sandwiches at a sandwich place in Missoula. We thought, oh, that's a nice exotic. And the first round he made, he put in hot marinade, so there was a little bit of boiling involved, and then apparently it was cold marinade, and a whole bunch of people got sick from that, and 2 died, which normally shouldn't really happen in food problems. So yes, you get sick, but death is much more exceptional. And then one guy, same year in Idaho, who was a morel hunter, who's been eating them for years, he went with friends on a canoe trip. They went on land where there was no roads or anything. They cooked something. He got out his dried char with fire morels, put them up on his little burner, and felt sick the same night and was dead in the morning. So really, once I heard that story, I didn't serve any morels at the next party, but I'm still enjoying that. But it's so there's definitely a footnote for us, and when you have a sensitive system, be extra careful and maybe don't indulge. But in Germany, the German Mycological Society for years tries to get people off the hook, and they gave up because few people want it, and it's commercially traded, and most people have no issues. If you have an issue, um, yeah, you got to lay off. But chiromycin can even kill you. So, not when you have treated it properly. So, in Finland, it's the only country in Europe, and let's say Western Europe, where you can trade them still legally, and you get a little note with it that you have to parboil it twice for detoxification. And you shouldn't do that in a closed room because the volatile nature of the chiromycin means just that you inhale it, which in the end is not good for you either. And we do have a research paper from French Alps where there's a village where people indulge in chiromycin, and there's reports of higher rates of Lou Gehrig disease. So statistically, all of Scandinavia has a little bit more than the rest of Europe. Not totally conclusive, and they haven't compared different villages and so on. Said we could conclude water pollution or this or that. Then I was just met a guy a couple of days ago who told me his brother-in-law had Lou Gehrig disease, and so had 7 of the 8 neighbors near Wenatchee, Eastern Washington, next to an orchard. So pesticides, pretty clearly the pesticides, and And yes, maybe some of these people had eaten gyromiters. The French study is a warning sign, but it's not conclusive. And when I hear 7 out of 8 neighbors in the street having Bulgarian disease, that is really upsetting. And so I've eaten them once. They grew in my yard. Yes, they taste okay. They have good structure. They're quite like umbrella. But you know, I regret that it's business to try these things. But and the second time I eat it the day before I flew to India, so they won't get old in the French. That was stupid. It could have gotten me sick. You know, sometimes it's just like that. So then Gyromitra montana supposedly has no gyromitrin. Newest research got much better in detecting it before it needed to be flushed to detect it. And when you pick it and then a week later it's in the lab or 2 days later in the lab, often a lot of it is gone, but now they worked out a way that it doesn't matter anymore how fresh it was to quantify it. And Dirk Older, is it Dirk Older?
Alden Dirks.
Older Dirks, sorry. Alden Dirks in the Midwest. He did a lot of research and changed names and so on. But basically, the tree of life, the genetics tell us 2 groups in gyromitrin, and the Esculenta group, all in Gyromitra, has gyromitrin, and the other branch, which includes Gyromitra montana, doesn't have it. And these are more reddish and often where we find our morels in clear cuts along roads. And so we can enjoy these just as careful as we enjoy morels. Cooking, always important. And but then comes the weird footnotes, these Decinas or Gyromitra pig's ears, which I've eaten a bunch. It turns they're on the side where there should be no Gyromitra, and then there's one pig's ear, which PCDcina lupusanta, that's Greek for white yellowish, so very light, and that has traces of gyromitrin. Now, if you happen to eat that, that won't kill you if you follow the safety steps anyways you follow for any gyromitra or any morel. But still, it's not fair. We have that DNA now stuff that separates these 2 branches, and then there's the one exception. So go figure. Not a spring mushroom at all, but here on the coast already in June, the rainbow chanterelles could be kicking in. July, much more reliable. So lucky that you have here this always nearly year-round fruiting in the coast. Now this is a picture from Colorado, where you see how intensely orange they are under the cap and how pale the top of the caps. And they're called rainbow chanterelles, was really young. And I never got that picture, I never saw it, but they have a pinkish hue on top. Really beautiful. And I mean, could not put a chanterelle. So this is anybody knows what that could be? And we would have that out here in the woods too. It's young, very young. So I was blown away when I this is maybe 2-3 inches long. That's what it's gonna be. Oh, yeah. So it was in a path, and it was erosions where you saw that, and it got color and Turbinellus fucosus, the woolly waste. I don't want to use woolly chanterelle because it is not closely related to chanterelles. It's closely related to the corals and pig's ear. Yes, it has side effects. Tony, you want to talk about it? No, good. Good choice. Hey, Tony, it got you to the club, right? Yeah, so 30 years ago now? Nearly 30 years ago, Tony ate the woolly chanterelle. I ate the woolly chanterelle several times too, and I was lucky. But in other moments, it tells you very quickly that you have to empty your bowels. And so some people refer to them as the shitters. And but I met a lady from the Columbia Church who told me she cooks it for friends and family, and everybody's fine, but she cooks it really long. So this is an important thing. Mushrooms that can cause trouble And the people who have poisonings from them, I mean, if you just do one time to empty yourself, it's one thing. Camping is not this, but it could be also 3 days, 2 or 3 days that you. It actually happened to me last. So what I did, I found these really beautiful white turbinellas, Kaufmannia. Mr. Hoffman was a mycologist from, I think, Michigan. Might have been the teacher of Alexander Smith. He came out here 100 years ago, maybe 90 years ago, and he collected a whole bunch of mushrooms, Olympic Peninsula, and so, and one of them was Gomphus Kaufmannii. It's called back then, it's white. And there was a little one. And I'm thinking, these things look really beautiful. And so, since I never had a problem with the red one, I thought, okay, I'll try it. And first time, I go to the bathroom, consistency. Interesting. I thought it was funny. I thought nothing happens, and something did happen. But after the second or third day, I didn't think it was funny anymore. I'm definitely not engaging turbinellas and turbo bowel movements anymore. Some people get that from corals. The good news with corals, they're both in controls, in order controls, if you don't know anything that would cause organ failure. Organ failure is the thing we really do not want to get involved with. But intestinal upset is also very unpleasant. So, if it's not nice, we really want to avoid that. And so many of our corals seem to be harmless, but some young ones in fall can really do you in. And I just heard from a person in also one of the Yellow Spring corals called them and made them throw up. But most of us have no problem eating the Yellow Spring corals. There's mainly two species, Ramaria racilispora and then Ramaria magnites. The last talk I insisted it was Maya. Well, I got the first two letters right. Magnites Bigfoot, and so you gotta watch out that the deer don't pee on it because they like to eat it, and they would also mark it sometimes. So they do that also with matsutake. Then we have puffballs, and in general we say you can eat this ball as long as it's white on the inside and marshmallow-like consistency, because you do not want to fall for bluff balls, which other way around, which are these buttons of Amanita. And here it's fairly easy because it's Amanita africa, the apricot Amanita or spring Amanita here, and that has an orange skin. And then you can see right away, okay, there's something going. But you also would see a structure here of gills and a stem. So whenever you pick your puffballs, you want to slice them open and make sure you don't have an amanita. I talk to people that poison their family feeding them bluff balls. So the puff balls would have a homogeneous marshmallow-like consistency when fresh and young, and some have these really cool shapes on the outside. And it's still not the slide I prepared. I wanted to share. Sorry. Anyways, and then we have giant puff balls in drier areas east of the Cascades, and they get really big, and you gotta see a lot of people to really consume them. Last year on the coast, we had that crazy flush of the deadly wet. So I never seen it. I've been 30 years in the Pacific Northwest, and yes, the first 10 years I didn't have a radar like that I was just still figuring out a little bit what's something to eat. But that took a while to get really deeper into it. And that was last year, just amazing how they were very common wherever there was spruce on the coast. So there's spruce associated there. And luckily we don't eat anything that looks like it. Just strange, hardly any good pictures before. Nobody had them. Like I asked Steve Trudell, he never found it before. and a whole bunch of people. And then last year it was very abundant. That's the same tiny on the coast, and that's tiny red name in Tuckerbush. That's maybe a quarter of an inch maximum. Very young. You see how big the mycelium still is. The scarlet on it, thin yellow. Notice. I mean, they really get the human effect out twice. Um, Adonis was the guy who left it. I think it was Adonis, not Narcissus, who looked at his mirror image in the water. Am I confusing Narcissus or Adonis? Anyway, Greek mythology, some good-looking guys who got carried away by that. Yeah. Mycena epipterygia. So this is winged here. Epi, I don't know what's winged on top here, but there's a whole bunch of varieties, and this one decaying wood, and beautiful, colorful little mycenas, just like this guy. So that was the first time I found that in the Pacific Northwest, the blue footed one-neck bonnet. Mycena amicta, so there's a lot of species under that name, and we still, that should get its own name, and also spruce. I don't know if that had an impact on it or not, but it was in the same spruce forest as the quaternarians. And then even more beautiful and intricate, this little Mycena interrupta is an Australian species, but it has all these fine hairs on the cap, and it's pretty small. In Bhutan last year for the first time, so I kept finding all these cool little Mycenas, and this marasmus. Now I'm in Colombia, so I'm not on the west coast here, right? But just incredible that handle of this mushroom. And the name is just, it's named for the tagetes flower. So that's not really a tagetes orange, but I found them also a little bit brownish. So there's a bunch of marasmus species who have, color, go between colored lines and white. And that should be in the old days that would have needed to be Racina as well. Racina, it probably can keep its own genus, Fabalastia. So we are here in the rainforest, and just beautiful things, and with marginate, four gill edges, just like Mycenas. Okay? Really small guys, many of them tiny, on wood, decaying, just really meters across. And we found the first white one was found here on the coast in dune grass. Tiny white Fabalaskia. So before, no record of Fabalaskia here out west, and much more dominant in the tropics and the southern hemisphere, but now so tiny species. When we talk about, what is this, eighths of an inch or so, you can look it up at Matchmaker, Micromatch. You guys all know Micromatch? Free software download with thousands of pictures for the Pacific Northwest. Such great software. I just love it. Now here a little bit further down, beauty cabins with cherry babies. India are always around oaks. And in the old days, we would give these all different names to the colors, but probably all perseverance. So a lot of DNA were necessary, and different stages of age, possibly, or just different colors. But there's some research that says the old approach, dividing it by color, does another beautiful blue mushroom, but also in Colombia. And yes, I already admitted to it at camp. This is one mushroom. So I turn it around, and then with Photoshop, I merge these things, and I spend half an hour. But it's so lucky that we have these possibilities working with images. Okay, so officially now I'm going to the edible gilled mushrooms, and back here to the Pacific Northwest in spring. And we gotta be much more careful with gilled mushrooms, because maybe we have a dozen deadly mushrooms out here. And the majority is killed. And luckily, there's not many of them that we confuse with anything, but the two things that are most troublesome is when people look for magic mushrooms, when there's a funeral bell on false stalker, ballerina, autumnalis, or marginata, same thing, different names, that get you very much magic mushrooms, all gluing is the key, or then here, death caps, Amanita phalloides, which was introduced with European oaks, and not a spring mushroom. We have some spring vernicopora amanitas here that are very pale amanitas. So we usually try to tell people, you don't need to eat these guys because as soon as we get to really pale amanitas, we got to be very careful. The gamble is just too high. But you know, they have features Amanita phalloides would not have, but it's really you wouldn't find that in these edible mushrooms for this is really okay. Do I want to go there? Yes, I know my mushrooms. Of course, it's different. It doesn't look like a phalloides, but that means you should really know phalloides as well. Then the other like Amanita Opriata, which is named for the last words of the guy on the deathbed. Here I come, O Creator. So, okay, that was me. So, spore prints, you take a cap, take off the stem, or you make a hole in the paper, aluminum foil, and then you let the spores run down. And this is our spore rainbow. It's not as colorful as mushroom dyeing, but you see the different tones. Sometimes you think you might be colorblind, all the shades of brown, not easy. And interesting information is dark spores have melanin in there, and the melanin protects them from UV light, and they have a much longer lifespan. In the old days, it was the whole system was sorted guild mushrooms by spore color, but by now we have also cases where dark sport and white sport fungi might be in the same family, and before that, the green sport chlorophyll was always like it's totally like the other shaking parasols. They have white spores that has green spores. Therefore, they cannot be close related, but no DNA says now the white spores have the same name as the green sport one. So I have a picture. Now, Hygrophorus subalpinus, surprisingly enjoyable. It's a very sturdy, short-stemmed mushroom, so not looking like a death cap, not a slender long stem. It has a bit of a ring, so you can see the difference here how there's biomass attached to the lower part, but the upper part is always clean because the cap was attached to the stem and leaves a little bit of a ring. Good consistency. I was surprised. I expected something pretty tasteless, but interesting mushroom after snow melt in the mountains, and you can find a bunch of them. Much rarer. Things can play a little bit when you don't prepare properly, when you just try them. That was really enjoyable. So when you parboil it, we did it twice parboiling, 10 minutes. One time would fully suffice, I'm pretty sure. But you see the first round of water, it's much darker. With the fly agaric, it's going to be red. Second round, much paler. And then you do dry frying. No butter, no oil. And then it starts sticking soon to the frying pan, and then you add your butter. It's still firm after twice parboiling. So the cells release water when they hit hot water. They firm up. And that works with many mushrooms. It doesn't really work with armillaria. With honey mushrooms, they get totally slimy, but they have a... Tony, you know how to pronounce it. Mucilaginous. Yeah, I'm hesitant to try that first. And these tricky words. And anyway, so we had slight on a toast with some parmigiano, enjoyable, and it's fine. That's a amanita you can eat that grows out here. Whenever you have yellow specks on a brown ground, it's Amanita augusta, and it's very boring and taste. I tried 3-4 times, and I would not like these mushrooms. Nobody has really eaten, and we have no knowledge that you can eat it. David Aurora wasn't here with the new genetic knowledge that it is not the European Amanita francetti AI, the name here. It just is totally bland and boring, like a whole bunch of Amanitas. And then I found this in Bhutan that just looked like this thing, and maybe the Bhutanese is actually very close to the European Franchetti. There's a whole bunch of fungal connection between Europe and the Himalayas. Um, just old world conifer forest. Depends in which altitude you are. In the tropics, it's all Indo-Malayan. Higher up, it connects to East Asia and Europe. So then right now, peak season kicking in for our spring oysters, especially alders. So when you know where there's alders, and you know especially dead alders, when they're dying, very often they have these infestations of oysters, or it's an awful infestation. They will produce oysters for us. They're really nice mushrooms, fairly easy to identify, in clusters, on board, very recurrent gills. They really go to the end stem base. If there's an extended stem base in the soft wood, it's really fluffy, smooth cap, and when you're new to it, you want to stick with the clusters. You want to have the clusters there, and you don't want to start hunting things like that. Because if they're in the 2 or 3 inch classes, there could be something you don't want, which is toxic. Oysterlings, crappy donuts. You want to stay with clusters when it's new to you, and make sure there's some mushrooms with 4 or 5 inch diameter. The problem is when they get old, they have lots of insects and they get soft and rotten. So that's the Pleurotus pulmonarius on alder, and sometimes also on conifers. Then we have Pleurotus populinus that grows on cottonwoods and aspen, and that gets much bigger, has a more brown color. And when old, it just gets. So the one goes soft and bad, and these go tough, and so not fun cooking with them, but you can round them up. And also, interestingly, they contain lovastatins. So people pay a lot of money for that to lower the blood pressure. Much more common in the US. In Europe, they prescribe much less of these. I'm in the wrong field here. Yeah, I'm clearly in the wrong field. I'm not a medical doctor. So we leave it at that. And our American found here in Flint, I found actually Pleurotus austriatus, which was first described in Austria. And then all the old books just write we have Pleurotus austriatus, or maybe something else. And then the DNA revolution came, no austriatus. So in California, we still have an undescribed species, but out here we know populinus on cottonwoods and aspen, and first pulmonarius and aspen, and then in a part in Kirtland, Washington, austriatus showed out, but it was on imported Lombard poplars, these column-growing ones. So there was the connection. There was a European tree, and the European tree had the European oyster mushroom there. Something everywhere, wood chips going for 4-6 weeks now, big groups of atrocity prayer-cocks covering this field side, this terrible seabed, those Greek prayer-cocks being early, and the Springfield cap, actually not toxic, has a very strong farinaceous, mealy, melon-ripe, cucumber odor that for a lot of people is unattractive. A whole bunch of mushrooms have it. Most lose it when you cook it, like Phytopolis, the sweetbread mushroom, really tasty. It evaporates, but these guys have so much it stays in there. And I enjoy them once in a while, and Leah also. So, but we wouldn't trade in any good mushroom for this mushroom. But if it grows in your yard on wood chips, or it's right in your neighborhood, why not? A few of them. And my twin brother just sent me on Saturday some pictures from Germany, and yeah, it's really mealy. Okay, brown sport, and then the cat cracking in these polygons when they are sun exposed. So here you see already these lines on there, but when they get really sunburned, that's how they look, and that's really typical. Otherwise, they have so many shapes, it's really um, confusing. Everywhere around people, agricultural areas, towns, we have the shaggy manes, really easy to recognize. They have these long, big, cylindrical, conical caps with shaggies on there. And when mature, they liquefy their caps, and that liquid spore mass drops to the ground. It's way, it's not toxic, it's not nasty tasting, um, and so you can just pick what's left here and enjoy. But you want to watch out. So this is, you see the scoreboard that's in Kirkland along the road. That's been in that space for maybe 100 years, not the pavement, but travel. So I would eat these guys because the likelihood of heavy metals there with car fumes there for decades, they are just really good in concentrated mist. So I have now a couple others later on. Agaricus, also very good in concentrating heavy metals. So you've got to be really pay attention when you pick these things. Coprinellus, my kitchen, the microcap, Victorian concentrations, decaying wood. So that's their substrate. So I would guess that the tree already might not take up as much heavy metals. I didn't really find answers for that questions if the tree takes it up, but the substrate is wood. Fairly easy to identify, and smaller, much smaller than the big shaggy manes, and they have these little pieces, these specks of a universal veil of a one cell deep skin on the cap, but that washes away after the first rain. They also liquefy black when mature, and if you catch them in this stage, a bunch of them quite enjoyable. But I wouldn't drive 60 miles to find them. We have other options. But on a walk in the neighborhood, on a stump of a tree, or in a local forest, yeah, sure, one or twice in spring is fun. Also in May, June, with rains, when it's getting warm, we will have the fruits, Megaricus. So it starts out with whitish, pale whitish, pinkish hills, and when mature, it goes to this chocolate. It's very pretty here, but chocolate brown spores. Strong odor of almond, scaly cap, scaly stem, big veil, that will shrink, just drop down how big they are, but then they shrink and shrink. And flesh is gonna stay orangish and really tasty, and also heavy metal concentrates. So be prudent where you pick them. I had a map from Kirkland where I had 17 spots. Coming on, let's visit all the spots. And I learned French mycologists had to put them on the list as not recommended edibles because of the heavy metals. So when they grow in my yard, like right here, I'm happy to eat them. Not get my yard is necessary, totally heavy metal free, but the doses makes poison, right? Also tuna once in a while is great, same as mushrooms, but daily dose or doesn't make sense. Oh, there's the other quote. Also 15 years ago. And then in my backyard, in many backyards, spring and fall, so good. These shaggy parasols, also scaly caps. The amanitas are quite similar with the slender stems, with the rings, with the fat stem guys. But these guys have scales on the cap. We do not have any scaly amanitas out here. They do stay red, which orange red, very helpful to identify. Crucial that you have that little thing, makes them really safe. And if you fry them gills down in butter or in oil, so good. Really strong umami, one of my favorites. And great mushrooms, big groups, and there's a couple similar ones. Also from Europe introduced Chlorophyllum rhacodes, and then the native Leo, which is more stout, shorter stems. Apparently, some people get upset stomachs. With this one, most people get upset stomach. We hardly have it here yet. We have only a few records, new records with climate change, really nasty poisonings. the green sport parasite or Philomonitis, which is found around the world in warm areas in big rings, fairy rings in grass. And then really good in grass is also the fairy ring mushroom, deep gills, white spores, very changeable cap color according to water content. And they always mentioned poisonous, really poisonous look-alike. Well, doesn't look much like it, but hey, that's so in grass. There's even other deadly mushroom in grass. This is a really tough stem. So whenever you find a mushroom, small brown mushroom in your grass, take it by the stem. If it doesn't break right away, then start to figure out what you have. If it breaks right away, don't bother. It could be even a deadly conosophy for China. Okay, so we're nearly done here. This is the transition to the police, but here a picture from Bhutan. After my mushrooming tour 2 weeks in Bhutan, I went with National Mushroom Institute, and we were looking actually officially for magic mushrooms because the royal family, the mother of the king or the wife of the king, has heard about the healing power of magic mushrooms, and they want to use that. They have also problems with drug addiction. Opiates are all around there, close to the Golden Triangle, and so we were looking for magic mushrooms. I was there originally to find Maoa, which is, you have heard there was this press release from Colin Domnauer about the mushroom that makes you see people. So Colin wanted to come without us, with this out there. We have the same reports in Putin, and we wanted to research, but then the focus shifted to magic mushrooms because it's more is now interested in magic mushrooms. We didn't find anybody that had experiences. I talked to persons who had these visions before in and wanted to wait till to talk about it and publish it or so. But we found a bunch of clear psilocybin and now have the samples there. And so I hope they will do these healing stuff. So now I'm talking about a couple of beliefs and then I'm done. So what is a belief? Most of you don't know. It's pushing quite big. It's a sponge-like fertile tissue under the gap. And most of them are mycorrhizal. And in the Pacific Northwest, all but 3 of them are non-toxic, and there's maybe another 3 that are really bitter, and then a few that are not exciting, or and a whole bunch of skills that are not exciting for sure. So we were out in your sisters up there at Lake Settle. That was a picture I took when I was last with OMS at Lake Settle in 2014. And these spring kings that in the fall, kings, a little bit more red, really great mushrooms. And one was a quite late year when we had the images. Now we were a little bit on the late side. Some really tasty mushrooms. Here I turned that into one of my lead cards where we get all the details. What is it growing with? First, should be a little bit, should be on first place. And then the states you can find them. I mapped out using iNaturalist where you can find the Spring King, and it's basically here the Cascades, Sierra, and then also here in the Canadians call it the inland rainforest. So up in BC you have these rainforests, and then you have it in the Idaho Panhandle, where you find a whole bunch of coastal mushrooms. You find again there in the forests. Another common spring bleed down here in the Douglas fir hemlock forest is Cerocomelus atropurpureus. When you find them young and fur, quite enjoyable. Once they get big and thin and forming, not enjoyable, but fresh, they're really good. Then, of course, most of our bolides are easy to find. The most common is all these swills we find. This one grows with pine. That can show up in spring, but more commonly, mad-shaped swills, flaky eye shows up already in spring and early summer. That grows with hemlocks, has blue staining in the stem and scaly caps. So that's an easy to identify swills. Otherwise, we have at least 3 species. You gotta pay attention when you have to change with your swills. It's so much easier. And then with your porcinis, right, you can process, you can dry them. If you find a veggie cutter like that totally, I mean, I sat there slicing these things. With this thing, I cut a big can in 4 pieces and then 12 pieces, 12 pieces. I mean, really efficient. And then drying them, you can make this really awesome wheat butter, or the powder on popcorn or in soups, whatever. I mean, and also swillers. You can use swillers for that. So I made a swillers butter, and that was also good. Swillers, the key is dry fry, no oil, no butter, and then swillers gets enjoyed. At least a handful of species, dry fry, really the key. And then king boletes and spring kings and so on, raw, really good. Slice them, oil, vinegar, and a little bit of Parmigiano, salt, pepper, bread salad. One daughter gets a belly ache from it, but it's also served that way in Italy. In restaurants, it's not a abnormal thing to serve maybe as fresh veggie raw. Okay, these are the leads you want to engage with, especially if you have no ideas of the movable leaders. These are red cord leads that have a reticulation on the stem, a network. 3 species potentially out here, all really toxic. So that guy even supposedly killed a person in Spokane. His mesenteric intestine stopped working for him. He was like in his 50s or 60s. So it was really odd, a long time ago. And otherwise, we have no reports of killing anyone out here. In Australia, it happened a couple of years ago. It's a relative of the parent. And then we have bitter bullets that stain strongly blue, but we have also animal bullets that stain blue. Kidney bullets will never stain blue. Shouldn't say never, 99% of the time. And these cases are really bitter, and, but don't seem to be really but your system will refuse them and you throw up. Okay, so I make lead cards, 55 cards, and at least in Oregon you should 50 of them. Very helpful to get to know your leads. Front you have these pictures, and back you have all these explanations, and you can get that from me here now. And up, I have a little bonus section, Roger. Sorry, I forgot. So just a bit of beauty quickly done. This is Laternia pusilla. This is Mother Earth's answer to the stinkhorn. And these are pretty small. Latin pusilla means small, nothing else, just small. And about 3 inches tall, maybe 4, but sometimes only 2. Central America, Colombia. Really short-lived a day. And then a couple of cordyceps before we're done. You know, these insect parasites. And these are in Colombia too, where I usually do a mushrooming 2 each year, but this year I didn't, but I will do next year again. This is a really big one because the cicadas are so big. So this whole thing is at least 10, 12 inches long with the cicada. Now, so this is a cicada with a serious case of infection, right? And then 2 days later, it looks like this. And Metarhizium, muscadine fungus, which if you're into wine, you heard about these fermented wines, same fungus, and also used in Chinese medicine. Already in the 8th century, we have references how he used muscadine from silkworm to maintain youth and health. So maybe that's something to experiment. A common Amazonian cordyceps, now Paraxaria, Amazonica, or grasshoppers, easy to find because it has these, you know, I mean, the whole thing is maybe that tall, 2, 3 inches, but the red color really helps. And the cordyceps will make sure that it's visible, that it's not hidden, but that it can disperse. It's on top of something. Okay, there comes the commercial section. These are the field guides I have produced through the years. Pacific Northwest, new edition. All the good edibles, a few poisonous ones to keep people grounded. Filled out 8 pages, laminated for states of California too, but that's what you want to have here. This one said if you travel anywhere, it's possible from the Gulf of Mexico to the coast of Argentina, but not helpful in pine and oak forest because there's no ectomycorrhizals, it's lower elevation. My Amazon field guides I did with Larry Evans, and then the mushroom knife for 15, I should have changed it again, emergency business, and then my book. So if you don't have it yet, if your objective is picking mushrooms to eat, it's no book that gives you much information. 180 species you potentially can eat, not all as good as what you usually eat, but you get all this information. You have poisonous lookalikes. You have 50 pages of recipe. Every scientific name is explained, Latin, Greek, or fantasy, or whatever, and really helpful. And yeah, second reviewed edition. And then I organized these travels for this year, Bhutan, but it's always sells so quickly in fall. I announced usually try to do it in early November, and then within weeks, my 12 places are filled, and then Colombia next year. So if you like that idea, please leave me your name and email and say Tibet or Colombia, and then inform you. So I don't put it up on Facebook usually because it's full, and I just work there with my mailing list. And it's also helpful to know attractive. Oh, somebody in Oregon might want to use this. Yeah. And then here, so you can find lots of stuff of mine, tons of pictures of mushrooming. We do a little bit of instant, but life happens beyond social media. And if you leave me your email, I do like 1 or 2 emails a year, so it's very hard. So yeah, not to sell you really my trips and upcoming presentations. And then I really want to thank all the volunteers of OMS. This is what these clubs are built up on volunteers, and I've been a volunteer for PSMS in Seattle for 30 years. This year is my 30th year, and without the local mycological society, I would be, if my life wouldn't have gone there. In Germany, why would you join a mushroom club when you learn it in your family? I mean, how many of you join a berry club because you grew up picking black? But it really opened me up and showed the whole spectrum that's out there. And, you know, my interest really got moved through the mycological society. So thank Kim for all these years of service here. She invited me. Roger put me up Friday, and all these other people here that contribute. It's so crucial. And then thank you all so much. And thank you.